I'd like to start off this segment with a shout out to Timcast's good friends, Anna Kasparian and Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks. You see, we have breaking news. In the third trial pertaining to January 6th, that is right, just the third, a man has been acquitted of all charges because, wait for it, the police let him in the building. The judge in the bench trial said it seems clear as day in the video this man was welcomed in by the police and thus not guilty. It's only the third trial. There have been two other trials. There's been a jury trial and another bench trial with the same judge. Now, in the bench trial, this individual was acquitted of some of the charges, but still convicted of the unlawful entry charge. Why? Well, it appears he climbed up a closed-off area to enter the property. Thus, the judge said, you knew you were trespassing. Now, the reason why I give this shout out to our good friends over at the Young Turks is because I made this point on Timcast IRL, as I often have. First, that those who engaged in violent rioting should be and would be convicted. Many people have been convicted, but typically because they pleaded guilty. For those that tried storming the actual Capitol, yes, they engaged in violent actions. Those that fought with cops, absolutely, they're going to get charged, and they're on video. No one denies that. Although I suppose maybe someone does, but generally speaking. Now, in this segment from the Young Turks, they call it Tim Pool makes the dumbest January 6th argument yet. And they title it Tim Pool defends January 6th rioters, which I did not do. As I have repeatedly said, the rioters should be and would be convicted. Here's how they describe it. Right-wing internet celebrity Tim Pool made an absurd argument against the punishment of January 6 Capitol rioters who entered the Capitol building. Pool claimed that since there were no trespassing signs posted, as well as many D.C. monuments being public property, rioters who entered the Capitol should not be charged with trespassing. Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian discuss. Well, maybe. It's been a while since we had this discussion on Timcast IRL, but I will give you my perspective, and I will always say maybe I don't convey or didn't convey the idea properly enough. I don't think that's fair, though. I don't think that's the case. I think the Young Turks just don't actually watch Timcast IRL, don't know what I actually said, see some out of context clip, make a segment about it, and then when I reach out to them and try and talk to them, they just ignore it because, well, they're not good people. But the point I made was that there's an incident where the door was opened by police. Police wave people in. One officer says, I don't agree with it, but I respect it, or something to that effect. Several officers have been punished for smiling and taking selfies with some of these people. Not every single person charged in January 6 was rioting. In fact, many of these people we referred to as, what do they call them? MAGA meemaws. Bumbling dotards who were just fumbling about, saw people walking towards the Capitol, saw the door be opened by police and cops waving people in, and they walked in. Now, what I said in this was that those people that walked in because the police allowed them in, you can't just charge them with a crime unless there's intent. And I know because we deal with this. We have very large no trespassing signs. The issue is, if the Capitol building is typically open to the public, if there are no barricades or signs, and the police open the doors for these individuals, how are you going to convict someone on trespassing? Now, disorderly conduct, perhaps. Just because you're allowed in somewhere doesn't mean you won't you'll get off on a disorderly conduct charge. So some of these people maybe, like the dude who's carrying that podium and smiling and waving for the camera. But the Young Turks don't care for nuance. They don't care for honest arguments. They just post garbage. They see a clip on Twitter out of context, and they make a big segment about it. They don't ask me for comment. They don't respond when I DM them. So when I say they're my good friends, trust I'm not being serious. Ladies and gentlemen, judge finds man not guilty in first January 6 acquittal. The defendant, Matthew Martin, had claimed the police let him into the Capitol during last year's pro-Trump riot. The judge agreed. Yes, because the judge saw the video of the cops literally letting people in. Expect more of this. My favorite response so far from these leftists, because I've called out the Young Turks, is they're like, oh, it was one guy. It was one guy. Yo, there's been 3 trials. Three. If someone just pleads guilty, well, that's their choice. And personally, I think it's really dumb. But a lot of people are getting bad advice from lawyers. Just plead guilty and go to jail. Yo, if you walked up to the building, were not party to any riot, did not see any violence, there's no barricades, no signs, and they open the door for you, you go to trial. And I got to be honest, a bench trial seems to make the most sense. You get a jury trial, you're going to get a bunch of, Democrat, DC, urban liberal types, and they're just going to be like, we don't care what you did. A judge, on the other hand, still may be very much biased, probably better off. I'm not a lawyer, so don't take my advice. It's not legal advice. Let me just tell you, though. They want to claim, so what? So one guy got acquitted. We'll expect more. Take a look at this story. Cowboys for Trump leader is given a mixed verdict in his January 6th Capitol riot trial. Oh, heavens, a mixed verdict? You mean he was found not guilty and guilty on certain counts? That's right. This guy entered a restricted area by apparently climbing over, they say prosecutors alleged Griffin climbed over an outer wall and then went up a temporary staircase to an outside deck at the Capitol. Judge Trevor McFadden, presiding over what was the first bench trial, said evidence showed Griffin crossing 3 walls and that Griffin would have seen fencing in the area. I agree with the judge. This dude, he was bypassing normal routes. We also have this other story. The first jury trial, this is back from February 8th, was a guy named, what was his name? Refit? I think his name? Yeah, Wesley Refit. Now, in the instance of this guy, he actually bragged about leading the charge. He told his kids they were traitors if they turned him in. This guy knew he was engaging in riotous behavior. So, of course, found guilty. So then we get this guy being found guilty. We get the second trial being mixed. And now this guy, Matthew Martin, acquitted on all charges. Here we go. From the New York Times, a federal judge decided on Wednesday that a former government contractor from New Mexico who claimed the police let him into the Capitol during last year's pro-Trump riot was not guilty of 4 petty offenses. The first acquittal connected to the sprawling investigation of the attack. At a 2-day bench trial in the federal district of court in Washington, the defendant, Matthew Martin, admitted that he went into the Capitol on January 6th, along with hundreds of other supporters of President Trump. But he claimed that he had not broken the law because 2 Capitol Police officers had waved him in through a door. Prosecutors argued that Mr. Martin was aware that he had entered the building illegally given the signs of the riot were clearly apparent all around him, including tear gas and alarms going off. I will pause there and say, no. You see, this is what the Young Turks tried arguing. They were like, you think that stepping over broken glass, you didn't realize you're breaking in? That is not how the law works, Young Turks, but they don't really care, do they? See, I talk to lawyers about this stuff. We have lawyers on the show, and I ask them. Based on their legal expertise, I form an opinion. Not a legal opinion, a personal opinion based on the news. And let me just assure you, glass on the ground is not indicative of trespass. Now, we've dealt with issues like this over at our properties. And what people need to understand is, in certain jurisdictions, I believe, Maryland specifically, I believe this is true in many other jurisdictions, trespass is when you are warned you're entering private property without permission. Burglary is when you bypass a barrier to enter a property. That means if someone puts a gate up on their property with a sign that says no trespassing and you walk past it, that's actually misdemeanor burglary. People think burglary means stealing from someone's house. It doesn't. It means entering without permission knowingly. That being said, they're not charging these people with things as simple as trespass. This guy was Martin was charged with entering and remaining in a restricted building, disorderly and disruptive conduct in a restricted building, violent entry and disorderly conduct in a Capitol building, and parading, demonstrating, or picketing in a Capitol building. This is the same judge from the mixed verdict, Judge Trevor N. McFadden. He said he found it plausible that Mr. Martin believed the police had let him in and thus had not knowingly gone into the building improperly. Case in point. My point was, trespass requires intent. Man, maybe I understand this. I used to work for nonprofits, right? We used to do street fundraising. It's where you go at the clipboard and you wave to people. Hi, how's it going? You want to talk to me about the environment? Well, the one thing we all knew, they wouldn't necessarily advise us of this, but they would warn us, is they would say, If you are at a store or a mall or some public space or that's private property, and someone tells you they're calling the cops on you, they actually can't do anything until you're warned to leave. So don't worry about these threats from people because we are allowed to be there. Now, specifically, I think it was in California, you're actually allowed to do nonprofit fundraising and activist activities on private property, so long as that property is open to the public. So that's why they were like, these threats are typically toothless. But in the event that cops were called while you were talking to people and trying to fundraise for activism, the cops would be like, typically they would be like, you're not doing anything wrong. You're allowed to do this. In the event that there was a specific threshold that you were not supposed to be on, the cops would walk up and say, hey, you got to come off. And we'd go, okay, sorry about that. We didn't know. And they'd be like, thanks, no problem. They'd leave. The cops can't just walk up to you and be like, we're arresting you. I mean, well, literally they can, but legally they can't. There are a lot of really stupid circumstances where I was fundraising and people try calling the cops and it's you've broken no law. So when I see stuff like this, I'm like, dude, if if you have a Starbucks, all right, typically open to the public, but one day it's not open to the public, it's closed. And then you walk up and a cop opens the door and says, howdy. And you walk in and the cop smiles. They can't then turn and arrest you for it. They let you in the building. But let's read. This is interesting. They're going to say, other judges are not bound by Judge McFadden's analysis of Mr. Martin's claims about the police. But in the wake of the acquittal, some defendants facing low-level charges who might otherwise have entered guilty pleas could feel emboldened to go to trial and test the government's case against them. More than 200 people have already pleaded guilty to misdemeanors connected to the riot. You see, many of these people knowingly crossed thresholds, like climbed over walls and stuff like that. We've seen photos. Some of these people, many of them, fought cops. Y'all are going to go to jail for that. But the meemaws, the bumbling fools who had no idea they were walking into a trap, and I don't mean fool as in like they're stupid people, as in they were ignorant of what was happening around them, is what I mean to say. The case of Mr. Martin, who once held the top secret security clearance as a private contractor, was the third connected to the Capitol attack to go to trial. In early March, they mentioned that Wesley Refit was convicted. Thomas Robertson, who is now on trial, faces charges of obstructing the certification of the election and interfering with law enforcement, blah, blah, blah. So one of the things they point out in this story, I think I have it right here, was that the judge said in the video, so we actually have photos of this. So this is interesting. This is Daily Mail. The dude Martin actually puts his hand on the cop's shoulder as if to thank him for letting them in. They very clearly thought they were allowed in. They say, Trevor McFadden, the judge, said it was reasonable for Martin to believe the outnumbered police officers allowed him in. Video played at the trial appeared to show an officer moving his arm in a waving motion inside the building as rioters moved past them. Trevor McFadden said it was reasonable. McFadden, who was nominated by former President Trump, also said Martin's actions were about as minimal and non-serious as anyone who was at the Capitol that day. Interesting. Martin's acquittal is a major milestone in the January 6th trials. Now, we already know this judge has convicted another guy for trespass, for entering illegally. So we have this video. You have the cops standing right here, allowing everybody in, not even trying to put their hands up to say stop. If the cops weren't letting people in, I would have not gone in, Martin said during his testimony without a jury on Tuesday, adding that he enjoyed the day of the riot. It was a magical day in many ways. I know some bad things happened. You understand that police officers died? Justice Department prosecutor Michael Romano asked him. That's not true. They say at least 9 people died in the riot or its aftermath. One officer died after he collapsed hours after being sprayed with bear spray, and other officers who tried to quell the riot died by suicide. You see the manipulative, dirty game that officers died, right? The officer who died after the fact, it was ruled natural causes. It's been a while since I've gone through the story, but I'm sure that was the case. I'm pretty sure that was the case. In the same courthouse where Martin was acquitted, a fourth trial continued on Wednesday. Now, this one's different. It's a former police officer who was charged with storming the Capitol with another off-duty officer. Martin, whose bench trial started Tuesday, testified that a police officer waved him into the building. A prosecutor dismissed that testimony as nonsense. The judge, however, said video shows 2 police officers standing near the rotunda doors and allowing people to enter as Martin approached. One of the officers appeared to lean back before Martin placed his hand on the officer's shoulder as a possible sign of gratitude, the judge said. McFadden described Martin's testimony as largely credible. The judge said it was not unreasonable for him to believe the officers allowed him to enter the Capitol. even though alarms were blaring and broken glass was strewn about the floor. Martin was charged with 4 misdemeanor counts, entering remaining blah, blah, blah. You know what the Young Turks are going to come out and say now? This judge is a Donald Trump appointed judge. He's part of the insurrection. He convicted the other guy. Spare me your lies. Broken glass on the floor does not mean you're not allowed to enter a building. I've gone to many a Starbucks with broken windows. I've once gone to a restaurant and someone broke a window and they say, sorry about that. Come on in. Broken glass doesn't mean you can't come in. You're not going to, that's unreasonable. The glass was broken. Clearly, the glass fell to the ground in a way that spelled do not enter. And I just didn't see it. It's ridiculous. The judge said Martin appeared to be a silent observer of the actions of others. McFadden did not find any evidence that Martin intended to disrupt Congress. Dozens of Capitol riot defendants have pleaded guilty and been sentenced, but Martin is the first to testify at a trial. Always, I will go to trial. I don't play these plea bargain games. And, you guys know that story. I went to, I was once arrested and charged for skateboarding. When I showed up at court, this was hilarious. The judge asked the prosecutors, because the cops were there who arrested me. He was like, what is this? Criminal. It was like criminal damage to a state-supported location. And they were like, yes, Your Honor. And the judge was like, and what is the defendant accused of? And they're like, he was skateboarding, Your Honor. And the judge takes his glasses off and he was like, excuse me? And they're like, Your Honor, he was skateboarding on the outside of the sidewalk of a federal building. And he was like, is this a joke? And they were like, no, Your Honor. And he goes, dismissed. What do you say? SOL, get out of my courtroom. Or he asked me, I think he asked me, is that true? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, get out of it. Stop wasting my time. It was kind of hilarious. Another instance, my brother and I were falsely accused. And then the security guards who attacked us at a mall lied under oath on the police reports. The cops just went along with it. And we refused. They were going to give us a slap on the wrist. Community service at our own discretion. And we were like, no. It's a longer story I've told before, but suffice it to say, I was like, I'll take a jury trial. And the court was like, a jury trial over a first offense slap on the wrist charge? And I was, oh yeah, we're going to get a full jury. We're going through all of it, baby. And they were like, I don't want to deal with this. These courtrooms don't want to deal with this. So this guy does a bench trial. Bench trials can be risky. You never know how the judge's perspective, but jury trials can be risky too. I'm not a fan necessarily of jury trials. I like the idea, but people in juries, you're just trying to win a popularity contest. You're trying to convince people to feel a certain way. There are challenges though with bench trials, in that a judge can be like, letter of the law says X, go to jail. And a jury can be like, that makes no sense, not guilty. You never know, man. In this instance, I think you've got too many people in DC who are left activists, and it was the smarter move for this guy to go for a bench trial. They go on to say, defense attorney Dan Cron said Martin saw another person shake a police officer's hand and enter the Capitol. Martin placed his hand on an officer's shoulder as a gesture of thanks and goodwill. The idea that he thought he had permission to do that is nonsense, Romano said. This is prosecution. Other riot defendants have claimed police waved them in or said they could enter. Yeah, and they all pleaded guilty, so congratulations. McFadden presided over a bench trial last month of Coy Griffin, a county official in New Mexico. The judge on March 22nd convicted Griffin of illegally entering restricted U.S. Capitol grounds, but acquitted him of engaging in disorderly conduct. Yes, and that was because we know he climbed up and over some walls. And, now we have a couple more trials happening. They say a jury in a different courtroom heard a second day of testimony for the trial of former Rocky Mount, Virginia officer Thomas Robertson. The town fired Robertson and another officer, Jacob Fracker, who joined him at the riot. Fracker was scheduled to be tried alongside Robertson before he pleaded guilty last month to a conspiracy charge and agreed to testify against somebody who is his mentor and father figure. Sounds like they're related. I absolutely hate this, Fracker said. I've always been on the other side of things, the good guys' side, so to speak. No, you haven't. Come on. Fracker testified that he and Robertson both believed the election was stolen. Fracker said they both wore gas masks as they joined a mob in storming the Capitol. And that is why you go to jail, because violent riots are wrong. What did these people think was going to happen? It's the stupidest thing ever. I'm sorry. The people who stormed the Capitol, I'm sorry, dumb as a box of rocks. Trump was speaking at the Ellipse, quite decently far away. People who were there were listening to a man give a speech. That was it. So many of these people didn't even go anywhere near the Capitol building that day. Many people showed up after the fact when the riot had already happened, having no idea what was going on and seeing barricades torn down and just walked in. On January, I think it was, January 20th, 2017, a whole bunch of black-clad Antifa types stormed through D.C., starting fires and destroying property. These people were mostly acquitted. Well, we couldn't prove who did what or why. They tried charging them with conspiracy. It didn't work. The people who got acquitted, it makes no sense to me. You showed up all black because you know what the plan is, to smash and destroy, and that's why they do it. You know people around you are smashing and destroying, and you still stay in this group as they run around smashing and destroying. Well, the courts basically said you can't prove any individual did anything, and that's the point of the black bloc tactic. So, if you can't prove someone's guilty, you can't convict them. What if you went outside one day wearing a black hoodie and sweats because you want to go for a jog and then you see Antifa and they arrest you and charge you for conspiracy and you're like, dude, I was literally jogging. Clothing is not evidence of a crime necessarily. With the black bloc stuff, I think you've got a bigger argument there. But these people were all acquitted. Now, most of these people, I believe, wanted trials because they were advised by legal groups to request a jury trial. Some of them pleaded guilty, but mostly they all said not guilty, we want a trial, and they all get released because the courts can't handle it. Unfortunately, these J6 defendants are all just pleading guilty. They shouldn't be. In my opinion, at least, for anyone's individual cases, you talk to a lawyer. I think people typically should always demand a trial. Make the government prove it. Prove it to a judge or to the people. There you go. Bravo, Young Turks. I look forward to that correction. Oh, you'll probably just make an argument that, well, he's a Donald Trump appointed judge, so yeah, but he convicted the other guy, so how about that? Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.